Candomblé and Umbanda. Brazil, beliefs, rituals, and traditions. From the African roots to the living synthesis. Candomblé, the Orishas preserved in Brazil with extraordinary fidelity, Ogun, Yemanjá, Oxum, Xangô, Xangô working through the terreiro communities that survived 2 centuries of persecution and suppression. Umbanda, a deliberate 20th century synthesis of Candomblé, Spiritism, Catholicism, and Indigenous Brazilian practice, perhaps the closest existing structural model to what Haligricity is doing. Personal reading series May Yemanjá Haligricity I. Productions. Contents. Introduction. 2 traditions, 1 Brazilian sacred story. Part 1. African roots, Yoruba, Fon, and Bantu in Brazil. Part 2. Candomblé, the tradition and its nations. Part 3. The key to nation, Yoruba Orishas in Brazil. Part 4. The major oryx of Candomblé. Part 5. Xangô, the Lord of the Crossroads in Brazilian form. Part 6. Yemanjá, Queen of the Sea. Part 7. Oxum, Orisha of sweet waters and love. Part 8. Xangô, thunder, justice, and royal power. Part 9. Ogun, iron, labor, and sacred opening. Part 10. Oxum, the creator and the white cloth. Part 11. ANDUMBANDA, wind, change, and the threshold. Part 12. The Candomblé terreiro, sacred community and space. Part 13. Candomblé initiation, Fecha do Santo. Part 14. Candomblé ceremony, the Xer, how to understand and participate. Part 15. Acts, the divine power in Brazilian practice. Part 16. Candomblé divination, Jogo de Bzios. Part 17. Offerings, egg, and ritual reciprocity. Part 18. How to perform the offerings, step by step. Part 19. Sacred foods and ritual preparation. Part 20. The birth of Umbanda, Orishas and the Brazilian synthesis. Part 21. Umbanda cosmology, the 7 lines of force. Part 22. The Umbanda spirit guides. Part 23. The Preto Velho, the old black ones. Part 24. The Caboclo, the indigenous guides. Part 25. Umbanda ceremony, structure and practice. Part 26. How to perform Umbanda opening ritual. Part 27. Candomblé and Umbanda today. Part 28. Haligricity convergences. Introduction. Brazil is home to the most vibrant African diaspora sacred traditions outside Africa itself, a consequence of the largest slave trade in the Atlantic world and of the extraordinary tenacity with which African peoples preserve their sacred heritage under extreme persecution. The 2 primary traditions that emerged from this history, Candomblé and Umbanda, are distinct in origin, theology, and practice, but they are part of the same Brazilian sacred story. Candomblé is the tradition of preservation, the effort to maintain the African sacred traditions, primarily the Yoruba Orisha religion, but also Dahomey Fon and Central African Bantu traditions, as close to their original form as possible in a New World context. The Candomblé communities of Bahia in northeastern Brazil achieved something extraordinary. They transmitted an essentially intact African religious tradition across 3 centuries of slavery, persecution, and oppression. The Orishas of Candomblé are recognizably the same beings as the Orishas of Yoruba tradition, the same characters, the same domains, the same songs, the same sacred protocols. Umbanda is the tradition of synthesis, a 20th century deliberate integration of Candomblé, Kardecist Spiritism, popular Catholicism, and indigenous Brazilian spiritual practices. Umbanda emerged in the early 20th century as an explicitly Brazilian tradition, not an African tradition preserved in Brazil, but something new, born specifically from the Brazilian cultural experience. For Haligricity, Umbanda is uniquely significant. It may be the closest existing structural model to what Haligricity is doing, a deliberate, spiritually serious synthesis of multiple traditions into a current living practice. African roots Yoruba, Fon, and Bantu in Brazil. The African peoples transported to Brazil came from multiple distinct cultural and linguistic groups across West and Central Africa. The 3 most important for the development of Brazilian sacred traditions were the Yoruba, the Fon and Ewe, and the Bantu-speaking peoples of Central Africa. The Yoruba presence. The Yoruba were transported to Brazil primarily in the late 11th and early 12th centuries, the period of the Oyo Empire's collapse and the subsequent Yoruba civil wars that produced large numbers of enslaved people. Concentrated in Bahia, the Yoruba brought the Orisha religion, the Ifa divination system, the sacred drum traditions, and the entire theological framework of the Yoruba world. Their concentration in specific communities, combined with the relative autonomy that urban enslaved and freed Africans in Bahia maintained, allowed them to preserve the tradition with extraordinary fidelity. The Bantu presence and the Angola nation. The Bantu-speaking peoples of Central Africa, the Congo, Angola, and Mozambique peoples brought a distinct sacred tradition centered on the Nkaisai and the Nkwisis. The Bantu tradition's emphasis on ancestor veneration, on the sacred power of specific natural substances, and on the Minkisi fed into Candomble's Angola nation and into Umbanda's diverse toolkit of practices. Candomblé, the tradition and its nations. Candomblé is not a single unified tradition but a family of related traditions organized into nations, each nation corresponding to a specific African ethnic origin and maintaining its own specific liturgical language, its own specific divine beings, and its own specific ceremonial forms. The major nations are Kitu, Angola, Gij, and several smaller nations including Ifon, Ijex, and Caboclo. The Kitu Nation. The Kitu Nation is the dominant and most influential form of Candomblé, the one that has shaped the public understanding of the tradition and that most directly preserves the Yoruba sacred heritage. Keta ceremonies are conducted partly in Yoruba, the Orishas are addressed by their Yoruba names, and the sacred songs, drum rhythms, and ritual protocols are recognizably continuous with Yoruba tradition. The three great Candomblé terreiros of Bahia, the Ilakse Nasok, the Ilakse Opafond, and the Gantuas, are the sacred centers of the Ketu nation and among the most important sacred sites in the African diaspora world. They have been led for much of their history by women, the Midi Santo, the female senior priestess whose authority in Candomblé is absolute within her terreiro. Candomblé in brief. Tradition type, African diaspora, preservation-focused primary African root, Yoruba, with Fon-Ui and Bantu nations geographic center, Salvador da Bahia, Brazil primary divine beings, the Oryx sacred language, Yoruba in ceremony primary practice, the terreiro community, Orisha possession ceremony, initiation leadership, Midi Santo or Pedi Santo legal status, persecuted until Mpuljas, now protected under Brazilian religious freedom law. The Kitu Nation Yoruba Orishas in Brazil. The Kitu Nation's preservation of the Yoruba Orisha tradition in Brazil is one of the most remarkable achievements in the history of world religion. Under slavery, with African religious practice illegal and Catholic baptism mandatory, the Candomblé communities of Bahia maintained not merely the general idea of the Orishas but specific sacred songs in Yoruba, specific sacred drum rhythms for specific Orishas, specific colors and sacred objects and foods and ritual protocols, details that require ongoing transmission from specialist to initiate to be maintained with any fidelity. How preservation was achieved. Preservation was achieved through the terreiro community, the tightly organized, hierarchical, family-like community of initiates centered on a senior priestess who carried the tradition's sacred knowledge and transmitted it to her initiates. The terreiro functioned as both a sacred community and a social safety net for its members, providing community, support, and sacred life to people denied these by the colonial and post-colonial social order. The intensity of community belonging and the practical benefits of terreiro membership were powerful incentives to maintain the practices that the terreiro required. The Candomblé community also used the same syncretism strategy as Cuba's Lucum tradition, identifying each oryx with a Catholic saint, allowing public display of the sacred images under the guise of Catholic devotion. But unlike in Cuba, where the syncretism was thoroughgoing, Candomblé maintained a clear internal distinction between the Catholic saints and the oryx. The saying in Candomblé is, "The saints are the clothes the oryx wear to go out in public." Inside the terreiro, the oryx are addressed in their own names, in their own language, with their own protocols. The major oryx of Candomblé. The oryx of Candomblé are the same sacred beings as the Yoruba Orishas, same characters, same domains, same fundamental theological nature expressed through the specific lens of Brazilian cultural experience. Some have acquired specifically Brazilian dimensions through their long residence in the New World, all are recognizably continuous with their Yoruba originals. Below are the major oryx with their Brazilian names, Catholic saint correspondences, and complete practical descriptions. Iensoe oryx of wind, lightning, change, and the threshold of death, Saint Barbara. The Candomblé terreiro sacred community and space. The terreiro is the sacred community of Candomblé, not merely a physical place but a community of initiated practitioners organized under a senior priestess or priest who is the terreiro's spiritual head, sacred knowledge keeper, and primary vehicle for the oryx. The terreiro is simultaneously a religious community, an extended family, a healing center, and a sacred institution that preserves the African heritage. The physical space. A traditional Candomblé terreiro includes several distinct sacred spaces: the barraco, the pigi or quarto de santo, the rung, individual houses or shrines for specific oryx in the terreiro's outdoor space, and the X-point, the sacred spot in the terreiro where the concentrated spiritual force of the tradition resides, often near a specific tree or stone. The hierarchy of the terreiro. The terreiro is organized in a strict hierarchy based on initiation seniority. The Me de Santo or Pé de Santo is the unchallenged spiritual authority. The Equid and the Oga are specialized roles. The Felhos and Felhas de Santo are the general initiate community, whose seniority is counted in years from their initiation. The Eo is the newest initiate in their year of restricted practice, wearing white, following the protocols of the newly initiated. Candomblé initiation Feiticeira do Santo, the making of the saint. The Feiticeira do Santo is the central transformative event of Candomblé practice, the multi-week process through which a person's head is formally opened to receive their oryx and through which they become a member of the terreiro community with specific sacred obligations and specific sacred identity. Bori, the initial head feeding. Before fall initiation, the candidate undergoes the bori. The bori is a ceremony in which specific offerings are made directly to the person's aura, the divine spark within them, to strengthen, cleanse, and prepare their head to receive the oryx. The bori may be performed multiple times over years before full initiation. It is the foundational practice of Candomblé, the recognition that before working with the cosmic oryx, the practitioner must attend to and strengthen their own inner divine nature. How to perform bori for yourself. Personal bori practice, head feeding for clarity and strength. This simplified bori is for home practice and self-preparation. It is not a substitute for the full ceremonial bori performed within a terreiro. Better prepare: white cloth for your head, a small bowl, cool water, shea butter, white corn or white rice, and a white candle. You can sit quietly and place the white cloth on your head. Breathe deeply. Feel the weight and warmth at the crown of your head. This is the seat of your aura. Speak to your aura. Oramai, I honor the divine presence within me. I feed you with love and ask for clarity, strength, and alignment with my true path. Take a small amount of shea butter and anoint the top of your head, gently rubbing in a small circle. Then anoint your forehead, temples, and the back of your neck. Place a small amount of white corn or rice in the bowl. Add a pinch of shea butter and a few drops of cool water. This is the symbolic feeding. Alta, sit with the candle lit for at least 15 minutes, holding your intention for what your head needs: clarity, healing, strengthening, alignment. Jita, after the practice, eat something white, rice, coconut, white bean to complete the feeding through the body. The full initiation process. Full Feiticeira do Santo initiation is a multi-week process conducted entirely within the terreiro under the Me de Santo's supervision. It involves determination of the head oryx, a period of preparation and instruction, the ritual shaving of the head, ritual baths with specific sacred plants and waters, the application of sacred markings, the presentation of the sacred objects that will serve as the oryx's material home for the initiate, the first public presentation of the new initiate to the community in their oryx's colors, and a period of up to a year in white before the initiate is considered fully integrated into their new sacred identity. Candomblé ceremony. The Xer, how to understand and participate. The Xer is the primary public ceremony of Candomblé, the gathering of the terreiro community for drumming, sacred song, and the invocation of the oryx, culminating in the possession of initiated devotees by their oryx, who then dance, distribute blessings, and receive offerings. The structure of the Xer. Xer ceremony structure. Opening. The ceremony begins with the paid, the honoring of Exu, and sending him away from the ceremony space so the other oryx can come without his interference. This is done before the community enters the barraco. Specific songs and a specific rhythm signal X's departure. Call to the oryx. The assembly enters the barraco. The drummers begin The fellows descend to form a circle and begin to sing and move in sequence through each oryx-specific song, starting with Oxum and proceeding through the full sequence. Each oryx has a specific sequence of 3 songs. The first calls them, the second invites them more strongly, the third is the moment of greatest intensity when the oryx may descend. The songs are in Yoruba and are accompanied by specific drum rhythms. The descents, as the appropriate songs are sung and the appropriate rhythms played, initiated devotees whose head oryx is being called may begin to receive that oryx. The Equid assist supporting those receiving, helping them to dress in the oryx's specific costume stored in the PG. The dancing, the manifested oryx dance in the barako, each with their specific movements, their specific costume, their specific way of moving that expresses their character. The community sings and the drumming continues. Blessings and offerings, the manifested oryx move through the community, blessing specific people, receiving offerings of food and flowers, speaking. Closing, the oryx depart. Specific closing songs are sung. The community shares food. Axe, the divine power in Brazilian practice. Axe is the foundational sacred power concept of Candomblé and Umbanda, the divine creative force that flows from the oryx through the terreiro community, through sacred objects, through properly performed ritual, and through the practitioners who have cultivated their relationship with the sacred adequately to serve as vehicles. Axe is simultaneously the sacred power itself, the affirmation spoken at the end of prayers and ceremonial declarations, the name for the concentrated sacred force housed in the terreiro's foundational objects, and the general quality of effective sacred force in a person, place, or object. Axe, the affirmation in Brazilian practice. At the end of as a greeting, as a closing in Candomblé and Umbanda ceremony, axe is used, prayers and petitions to affirm that the sacred force is present and active between practitioners who are affirming their shared sacred connection. Affirmation after ceremony to seal what has been done. As an acknowledgement of something powerfully true or beautiful that touched me deeply. Axe. In Haligricity, this is the same word used as ashi, same pronunciation, same Yoruba root, same theological meaning. The Brazilian form is simply the Portuguese phonetic spelling of the same word. Candomblé divination. Jogo de Búzios, the shell game. The Jogo de Búzios is the primary divination system of Candomblé, a direct descendant of the Yoruba tradition of casting cowrie shells that is one of the most widely practiced forms of divination in the African diaspora world. It is simpler than the full Ifa system but shares the same fundamental principle. The shells are cast, their pattern is read, and the pattern reveals which Odu is relevant to the current situation. The instruments. The Búzios are cowrie shells, the same shells used as currency across Africa and Asia for millennia. In divination, Wanalta shells are used, each with the top cut so that it has an open face and a closed back. When cast, each shell falls either mouth up or mouth down. The number of shells falling mouth up determines the Odu that is speaking to the current situation. How the Jogo de Búzios works. Reading the shells, basic Jogo de Búzios framework. The reader casts the 16 shells on a special mat after cooling them in their hands, blowing sacred breath on them, and asking the oryx and the currents ori to speak clearly. The count of open shells, Wanalta open, Ud the oryx adujo speaks, a sacred, rare sign Umbis open, Jib very serious, indicates death or transformation Wundurt open, Avu powerful sign of Oxal, Siri matters Wunsh open, serious, caution required Wunyuka open, Jilshibora speaks of Tsang, power, justice Umbr open, speaks of Oxal, peace and completion Siegs open, but speaks of Yemanjá, abundance and protection Bis open, speaks of Oxum, love, money. Healing Chopin, but speaks of Lanza, change, warning but open. Knurn speaks of Exu, everything possible. Choose carefully each count, then undergoes additional throws to determine positive or negative aspect, the specific message, and the appropriate offering to address the situation. Part 17. Offerings, Yeb, and Ritual Reciprocity. The Abo is the primary ritual technology of Candomblé, the material expression of the practitioner's side of the sacred exchange that sustains the relationship between human beings and the oryx. The oryx give their power, their protection, their guidance, and their presence. The practitioners give offerings, food, drink, light, flowers, sacred objects, and in specific ceremonial contexts, the life force of sacrificed animals. The logic of offering. Offering in Candomblé is not bribery and not supplication in the sense of begging a more powerful being for a favor. It is reciprocity, the acknowledgement of a relationship of mutual exchange, and the maintenance of that relationship through the material expression of gratitude, devotion, and the desire for continued connection. The oryx who receives proper offerings is not indebted to the practitioner. The practitioner who makes proper offerings is maintaining the health of a relationship that was already there, keeping the channels of communication open. How to perform the offerings step by step. The following are practical guides for making offerings to the oryx. These are accessible practices that can be undertaken by any sincere practitioner. Full initiation changes the nature and scope of what is appropriate, but these foundational practices are available to all. Basic offering practice for any oryx. What you need: candle in the oryx's color, small plate or tray, the oryx-specific food, water in a glass, and a quiet space. The process: better clean the space. Physical cleanliness is the first step. The oryx do not come to dirty places. You go light the candle. This signals that you are opening sacred space. Pour a small amount of water on the ground or floor before the altar. This grounds the energy and acknowledges the earth. To prepare the food offering on the plate. It should be the best quality you can offer, not leftovers. Place the plate before the candle. Hold your hands over it briefly and speak your intention clearly. Address the oryx by name. State what you are offering and why. State what you are asking. Be specific and be honest. Leave the offering in place until the candle burns out naturally. Do not blow out the candle. After the candle is done, the food offering should be disposed of respectfully, taken to the appropriate location for that oryx. Oryx offering guide, foods and correspondences. Exu, red and black candle, rum, kacha, or rum, cigars, pepper, roasted corn. Crossroads location: Yemanjá, blue and white candle, white flowers, perfume, mirrors, wood, river Oxum, yellow or gold candle, honey, yellow flowers, brass fan. Fried fish, shrimp, river or waterfall. Xangô, red and white candle, amal, red wine, rum, hilltop or tree. Ogun, dark blue or green candle, palm oil, errant objects, crossroads or forest edge. Oxala, white candle, only white food. Never offer alcohol to oxal, food of white tree. Yensa, copper or orange candle, red wine, red fabric tied to a tree, cemetery gate or windy hilltop. Yemanjá's festival offering, white flowers, small boat filled with perfume, comms, mirrors, blue fabric, small figure of the oryx, release into the sea. Sacred foods and ritual preparation. Food is sacred technology in Candomblé, not merely sustenance but the primary material vehicle for the oryx force, the medium through which X is transmitted to the community, and the form of offering most directly connected to the oryx's specific characters and powers. Sacred food preparation, the principle. Before preparing sacred food, wash your hands thoroughly. This is mandatory and sacred, not merely hygienic. Wear white or clean clothing. Set a clear intention before beginning. I am preparing this food as an offering, and as a vehicle for acts. Do not taste the food before offering it. It belongs to the oryx first. Do not prepare sacred food when in a state of anger, grief, or significant emotional disturbance. Cook with attention. Sacred food preparation is a meditative act. The amal, cook cornmeal with water until thick. Add palm oil a generous amount. The dend oil is what makes it sangs. Serve warm on a round plate. This dish is the most widely prepared sacred food in Candomblé and can be offered to Xang at any significant moment. Legal situations, situations of injustice, situations requiring royal power. The birth of Umbanda, Orishas, and the Brazilian synthesis. Umbanda was born on November 1, Orishas, at least according to the most widely accepted founding narrative, in the city of Niterói near Rio de Janeiro. A young man named Zlio de Moraes, who had been ill and whose illness was not responding to medical treatment, was brought to a Kardecist spiritist session. In the session, Zlio was possessed not by a European spirit but by a caboclo, the spirit of an indigenous Brazilian man who announced himself as the Caboclo das Sete Encruzadas. When the session leader objected to the appearance of an inferior spirit, the caboclo responded that there were no inferior spirits, that all souls in their development were worthy of respect. He announced that a new religion would be founded the following day, one that honored all the traditions of Brazil without hierarchy. What Umbanda is. Umbanda is deliberately syncretic. It synthesizes Candomblé's Orisha tradition with Kardecist Spiritism's spirit communication framework, popular Catholicism saints, and the traditions of Indigenous Brazil. Its spirit guides are not the ancient Orishas of Africa but the spiritual archetypes of Brazil's own history, the Preto Velho, the Caboclo, the Exu and Pomba Gira, the Craiana, and others. Why Umbanda matters for Haligricity. Umbanda may be the closest existing structural model to what Haligricity is doing. Like Haligricity, Umbanda is deliberately synthesized from multiple traditions rather than preserved from a single origin, organized around practical service to the community rather than doctrinal purity, open to practitioners from all backgrounds rather than restricted to a specific ethnic or initiatory lineage, continuously evolving rather than fixed, and understood as a living tradition rather than a historical one. Umbanda took the sacred tools of multiple traditions and built something new, something Brazilian, something that could serve the specific needs of the Brazilian community in the 20th century. This is what Haligricity is doing for the 21st century globally. Umbanda cosmology, the 7 lines of force. Umbanda organizes the divine world differently from Candomblé. Rather than the Yoruba system of individual oryx with their specific domains, Umbanda uses the 7 lines of force, 7 primary streams of sacred energy, each governed by an oryx and containing multiple spirit guides who work under that oryx vibration. The 7 lines of Umbanda. Linha de Oxum governs peace, healing, spiritual evolution, and the highest spiritual guidance. Spirits who work in this line bring clarity and elevated counsel. Linha de Yemanjá governs the waters, motherhood, abundance, and emotional healing. Spirits in this line work with family healing and the healing of the emotional body. Linha de Xangô governs justice, truth, the law, and the destruction of falsehood. Spirits in this line work with legal matters and moral clarity. Linha de Oxum governs the forest, nature, hunting, abundance, and indigenous wisdom. The Caboclos work in this line. Linha de Ogun governs the opening of paths, protection, and the removal of obstacles. Spirits in this line clear blocked ways and protect practitioners. Linha de Exu governs communication between worlds, crossroads, and the transformation of difficult situations. The Exus and Pomba Giras work in this line misunderstood as evil, they are actually the tradition's most effective workers in difficult human situations. Linha das Almas governs the dead, the souls in development, and the healing of grief. The Pretos Velhos and souls in transition work in this line. The Umbanda spirit guides. The spirit guides of Umbanda are not abstract forces or ancient gods, they are the spiritual archetypes of Brazil's specific historical experience, expressed as the spirits of specific categories of people who lived, suffered, served, and developed through Brazil's specific history. They are the tradition's most human faces of the divine. Preto Velho, Preta Velha. The Old Black Ones, spirit guides of wisdom, healing, and patience. The Preto Velho and Preta Velha are the spirit guides most beloved in all of Umbanda, the spirits of enslaved Africans who lived, suffered, and developed extraordinary spiritual wisdom through the experience of Brazilian slavery. They manifest in ceremony as very old, slow-moving, tobacco-smoking elders who move carefully, speak gently, and listen with complete, unhurried attention. Their wisdom is the wisdom of extreme suffering transformed into compassion. They have seen the worst that human beings can do to each other, and they have emerged not bitter but profoundly loving. The Preto Velho is the counselor of Umbanda practitioners bring their most difficult problems, their grief, their confusion, their shame, and the Preto Velho listens, advises, and offers simple remedies with the authority of one who has survived everything. His pipe is sacred, the smoke carries prayers. His chair is always available in the terreiro for him to sit when he manifests. Working with Preto Velho, light a white or purple candle. If you have a cigar, light it and allow the smoke to rise as an offering. Speak to him as you would to a wise elder, with respect, with directness, and with complete honesty about your situation. He does not respond to elaborate requests, he responds to genuine need and genuine honesty. His characteristic phrase in ceremony is Maitafelha, or Mufaho, terms of endearment that carry the weight of an elder's unconditional love. Caboclo Cabocla. Exu and Pomba Gira. The crossroads workers, fierce, effective, and misunderstood. Umbanda ceremony structure and practice. Umbanda ceremony is more accessible and less formally restricted than Candomblé ceremony. It is one of Umbanda's fundamental principles that the sacred should be accessible to all, regardless of initiation level. The Jira structure. The Jira begins with Catholic prayers, Umbanda's formal acknowledgement of its Catholic dimension. Then the opening song for the line of spirits being called. The mediums who are incorporated by the spirit guides stand in a line or circle. As the specific songs and rhythms for each spirit guide are sung and played, the mediums begin to receive their guides. The manifestations, typically less dramatic than Candomblé or expositions, often characterized by subtle physical changes, a changed posture, changed voice, or changed gestural vocabulary. The spirit guides, once manifested, work directly with the community members who queue to receive their counsel. The Preto Vahu listens to the visitor's situation and offers advice, prayer, and sometimes a specific herbal prescription. The caboclo may perform a specific healing gesture over the visitor's body. The Exu may deliver a specific, direct instruction about what must be done. The session ends with the spirit guides departing and the mediums returning to their ordinary consciousness, followed by specific closing prayers. How to perform Umbanda opening ritual. Umbanda home opening for personal practice. This is the foundational Umbanda practice for any personal sacred work. It is the calling of protective and guiding spiritual forces before any ceremony, meditation, or significant intention setting. What you need: white candle, glass of water, incense, small offering of food for Exu at the threshold. Step but prepare the threshold. Place X's offering at the door or threshold of your space before entering. This sends Exu to the threshold to guard outside the space, not inside. If you have an image of Exu or a crossroads symbol, place the offering before it. Step Yika cleans the space, light the incense and walk through the space counterclockwise, letting the smoke reach every corner. As you walk, say, I cleanse this space of all that does not serve the work of love and light. I ask that only forces of elevation and healing be present here. Step Sh. Place the glass of water. A glass of fresh water on any altar or table draws spiritual energy and keeps the space clear. This is one of the most simple and most powerful practices in Umbanda. A glass of clean water, refreshed daily, is the minimum Umbanda home practice. Step 2. Light the white candle. Light the candle for Oxum, the highest spiritual vibration, and sing or speak the opening salutation, Serve Oxum. Serve Todos os Guias. Step bis. Call your guides, sit quietly. Breathe deeply 7 times. Open your awareness to any impressions, images, or feelings that arise. These are your spirit guides making contact. Stay with this awareness for at least 10 minutes. Step Alta. State your intention. Speak clearly what you are working on, what healing, what guidance, what transformation you are seeking. Be specific. Step Jita. Close. When you are ready to close, say, Sarav. I thank all the guides who have been present. I close this space with love and gratitude. X. Extinguish the candle. Candomblé and Umbanda today. Both Candomblé and Umbanda are thriving and both are under significant pressure. Candomblé, concentrated primarily in Bahia and spreading through Brazil's major cities, faces ongoing religious intolerance from the evangelical Christian community, which has become increasingly aggressive in its attacks on Afro-Brazilian religious practice. Terreiro spaces have been physically attacked, practitioners have been harassed, sacred symbols and ceremonies have been condemned as demonic. The Brazilian state's formal protection of religious freedom has been only partially effective against the practical reality of community-level intolerance. Umbanda, with its more socially accessible structure and its explicitly Brazilian identity, has spread more broadly. Estimates suggest between 1 and 2 million active Umbanda practitioners in Brazil, with significant communities in Uruguay, Argentina, and growing interest from practitioners in Europe and North America. Umbanda's synthesis model, its openness to practitioners from all backgrounds, and its practically oriented spirit guide tradition make it particularly adaptable to contexts outside Brazil. Part 28. Haligricity convergences. Axe and Ashi, the same word in 2 languages. Axe in Candomblé and Umbanda is the same word as Eshi in Yoruba, and Haligricity, the same Yoruba root, the same theological meaning, the same use as a closing affirmation. The Brazilian traditions confirm what the Yoruba tradition established. This word carries real sacred weight, and its use in the Haligricity meal blessing and sacred language practices is not a borrowing of an exotic sound but an invocation of a specific, ancient, living sacred force. Umbanda is structural model for Haligricity. Umbanda may be the closest existing model to what Haligricity is doing, a deliberate, spiritually serious synthesis of multiple traditions organized around practical service rather than doctrinal purity, open to all practitioners rather than restricted by ethnic or initiatory lineage, continuously evolving rather than fixed, and understood as a living tradition rather than a historical one. The comparison is not about content. Haligricity is not Umbanda. It is about structure. Both are genuine syntheses that take the sacred seriously while refusing the exclusivity of any single tradition. The Bore and the Haligricity self-preparation. Candomblé's Bore practice the feeding of the head, the strengthening and clarification of the personal divine nature within each practitioner, as the foundational practice before any other sacred work is the West African, Brazilian articulation of what Haligricity holds about self-preparation. Before the practitioner can serve as a genuine vehicle for sacred force, their own inner nature must be attended to. The Bore is the ritualized form of this recognition. The personal Bore practice described in this guide is accessible to any Haligricity practitioner. The Preto Velho and the Ancestor Dimension. The Preto Velho, the spirit of the enslaved African elder who has transformed extreme suffering into profound compassion, and is now available as a guide for those who seek genuine wisdom, is one of the most moving spirit guide figures in the global sacred tradition. The wisdom earned through the worst suffering, offered freely and without bitterness to those who come in need. This is the deepest teaching of the ancestor relationship in any tradition. The Haligricity ancestor altar holds the same recognition. The ancestors are not idealized figures but real people who lived real lives, who suffered and who grew, and whose earned wisdom is now available to those who maintain the relationship. The Xer and Haligricity ceremony. The Candomblé Xer, with its opening honoring of Exu, its sequence through each oryx songs and rhythms, its progression from calling to descent to dancing to blessing to communal feast, is the Brazilian African model of the complete sacred ceremony that the Haligricity Book of Rituals works toward. Every element is present: the specific opening, the sequential honoring of specific sacred presences, the embodied participation of the community, the offering and communal sharing, the formal closing. The Xer shows what Haligricity ceremony looks like when it has had 300 years to develop. Ser of Oxum. Ser of todos os guias. Honor to Oxum. Honor to all the guides. Umbanda opening salutation. 300 years of persecution could not silence the acts of the African terreiro. Umbanda was born in Orishas and declared that no spirit is inferior, that the Preto Velho and the Caboclo carry as much sacred wisdom as any ancient Orisha. Both traditions confirm the same truth that Haligricity holds: the sacred is not the exclusive property of any single tradition. The divine meets us in the specific forms we are capable of receiving, and synthesis when it is genuine, when it is spiritually serious, when it serves real communities with real sacred power, is not delusion. It is the next form that the living tradition takes. Acts. Grand Rising. Personal Reading Series, Haligricity Umbanda. Productions May Yemanjá Malta.